The wind howled like a wounded wolf through the Wyoming mountains, driving sheets of snow sideways across the narrow trail. Sarah Whitfield clutched the reins with numb fingers. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, now soaked through and clinging to her shaking frame. Behind her, she could hear them coming, the thunder of hooves muffled by the storm, but growing closer with each passing moment. "There! The witch went that way!" The voice cut through the blizzard, rough and merciless as the weather itself. Sarah dug her heels into the mare's flanks, urging the exhausted animal forward. The horse stumbled, nearly sending them both tumbling down the rocky slope. She'd been riding hard for 3 hours now, ever since she'd fled the church where her father had sold her like cattle to pay his debts. Marcus Thornton. Even thinking the name made bile rise in her throat. The land baron who owned half the county and crushed anyone who stood in his way. Her father had lost everything at the poker table, and when Thornton came to collect, he'd taken one look at Sarah and declared her worth more than any acre of land. Another shout. Closer now. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she guided the mare around a massive boulder. The trail forked ahead, one path leading higher into the mountains, the other curving back toward the valley. She chose the mountain path without hesitation. Better to die in the wilderness than live as Thornton's property. The storm intensified, visibility dropping to mere feet. Sarah could no longer feel her hands or feet. The mare's breath came in great clouds of steam, each step more labored than the last. They rounded another bend, and suddenly the ground disappeared beneath them. The mare screamed as they plunged down an embankment, tumbling through snow and brush. Sarah flew from the saddle, the world spinning in a chaos of white and pain. She hit something hard, a tree, maybe, and stars exploded across her vision. When the world finally stilled, she lay half buried in a snowdrift. Her ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. The mare was gone, vanished into the storm. Sarah tried to stand but collapsed immediately, a sob tearing from her throat. This was it. Then, she would die here in the mountains, frozen in her wedding dress, all because she dared to want freedom. She went this way, fresh tracks. Terror gave her strength. Sarah dragged herself behind a fallen log, pressing her body into the snow despite the agony in her ankle. Through the driving snow, she saw them, 2 riders picking their way down the trail above. Jake Morrison and Tom Briggs, Thornton's most brutal enforcers, men who'd burned down a family's home for $1 and sleep sound that night. They were almost directly above her now. Sarah held her breath, praying the storm would hide her. Morrison's horse snorted, pawing at the ground. "The trail goes cold here," Morrison growled. "That tumble probably killed her and the horse both. Thornton wants her back." Briggs replied, "Dead or alive?" He said, though he'd prefer alive for the wedding night. Their laughter made Sarah's skin crawl. She pressed her face into the snow, willing herself invisible. A rifle shot cracked through the air. Morrison's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. Both men wheeled their horses around, hands flying to their weapons. "Next one won't miss," a deep voice called out from somewhere above them. "Turn around. Ride back the way you came." "Who's there?" Briggs shouted, squinting into the storm. "Show yourself." Another shot. This time the bullet struck the ground inches from Briggs's horse, sending the animal rearing in panic. Last warning. Sarah had never heard a voice like that, calm as still water but with steel underneath. Whoever this stranger was, Morrison and Briggs believed him. They exchanged glances. Then Morrison spat into the snow. "Thornton owns this whole territory," he called out. "You just signed your death warrant, friend. I'll take my chances. Now get." For a moment, Sarah thought they might stand their ground. Then Briggs muttered something to Morrison, and they turned their horses back up the trail. Within minutes, the storm had swallowed them completely. Sarah remained frozen behind the log, unsure if she'd traded one danger for another. Footsteps crunched through the snow. Growing closer, a figure emerged from the white, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the sure grace of someone who belonged in these mountains. He wore buckskin and fur, a rifle held loosely in one hand, and when he turned his head, scanning the area, Sarah glimpsed a face carved by wind and weather, framed by long dark hair. His eyes found her immediately, as if he'd known exactly where she was all along. They were gray-blue, like storm clouds over water, set in a face that might have been anywhere from 35 to 45 years old. Hard living had etched lines around those eyes, but there was something else there too, a deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "You hurt." His voice was gentler now, though still carrying that note of authority. Sarah tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. The man, clearly native by his features and dress, slung his rifle over his shoulder and approached slowly, the way one might approach an injured deer. "Ankle," she finally managed. "Twisted. Maybe broken." He knelt in the snow beside her, his movements deliberate and careful. "Name's Chayton Ironhand. Been watching those two track you for the last hour." His hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined her ankle through her boot. "Not broken, but bad sprained. You can't walk on this." "I can't. They'll come back." Sarah's voice broke. "I won't go back there. I won't." Chayton studied her for a long moment, taking in the ruined wedding dress, the desperation in her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, of one kind of suffering understanding another. "They won't find you," he said simply. "My place isn't far. Can you ride?" "My horse." "Gone, but mine's sure-footed and used to carrying double." As if summoned, a paint horse emerged from the trees, a sturdy mountain breed built for harsh weather. Chayton lifted Sarah as easily as if she weighed nothing, though she noticed he was careful to touch her as little as possible, maintaining a respectful distance even in rescue. "Hold tight," he said, swinging up behind her. "Storm's getting worse." Sarah had no choice but to lean back against him as they rode, his solid presence the only warm thing in a world gone cold. The paint horse picked its way through paths she couldn't even see, guided by its rider's sure hand. Her ankle throbbed with each jostle, but she bit her lip against complaint. "Why?" she asked after a while, having to raise her voice over the wind. "Why help me?" Chayton was quiet so long she thought he hadn't heard. Then, "Man who forces a woman to marry him ain't no man at all. Just another kind of wolf that needs putting down." There was a story there, Sarah sensed, but the cold was seeping into her bones now, making thought difficult. She drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of trees giving way to a clearing, of a structure looming out of the snow, a cabin built sturdy and low to the ground, smoke rising from its chimney like a promise of warmth. The last thing she remembered was being lifted down from the horse, carried through a doorway into blessed heat, and laid on something soft. A deep voice murmured something in a language she didn't understand. A prayer, maybe, or a promise. Then darkness claimed her, and Sarah Whitfield knew no more. Sarah woke to the sound of wood crackling in a fireplace and the rich scent of brewing coffee. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The rough-hewn log walls, the thick buffalo hide covering her, the soft bed of furs beneath her. Then memory crashed back, the flight, the storm, the mysterious man who'd saved her. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her ankle sent sharp spikes of pain up her leg, drawing a gasp from her lips. "Easy there." Chayton Ironhand appeared from the shadows near the fireplace, a steaming mug in his hand. "That ankle needs time." In the warm glow of the fire, Sarah got her first real look at her rescuer. He was taller than she'd realized, with the kind of quiet strength that came from years of hard living. His hair, black as crow's wings, fell past his shoulders in the traditional Lakota style. But it was his eyes that held her, those storm-gray eyes that seemed to carry the weight of old sorrows. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, accepting the mug gratefully. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the last of the cold. "Most of the day. Sun's setting now." He moved to a rough-made table and began working with something she couldn't see. "Needed to get that dress off you before you caught your death. My sister's clothes are in that trunk by the wall. They're old, but they're warm and dry." Sarah looked down and realized she was wearing a simple doe-skin dress, soft as butter against her skin. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but Chayton kept his back turned, giving her privacy even in conversation. "Your sister? Dead, 10 years now." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Sarah heard the pain underneath. "The fever took her, along with my wife and daughter. Took half the band that winter." 10 years. Sarah studied the cabin with new eyes, seeing now what she'd missed before. Everything was well maintained, but frozen in time. A woman's cooking pot by the fire, small moccasins on a shelf, a child's doll made of corn husks sitting in the corner. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a tomb of memories. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Chayton shrugged, still working at the table. "Long time passed. You hungry? Got venison stew keeping warm." As if on cue. Sarah's stomach growled loudly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, certainly not at the wedding that morning. The wedding! God! Was it only this morning that her father had dragged her to the church? Chayton brought her a bowl of stew and settled himself on a log stool near the fire, far enough away to be proper. He ate in silence, and Sarah found herself studying him over her spoon. There was something almost monastic about him, a man who'd stripped his life down to essentials. No wasted movements, no unnecessary words. "Why do you live up here alone?" she finally asked. "Why does anyone live anywhere?" He set down his empty bowl. "The mountain doesn't ask questions, doesn't make demands, just lets a man be. That's not an answer." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen from him. "No, I suppose it's not." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "After they died, I couldn't stay with the band. Too many memories, too many children that weren't mine, wives that weren't mine. So I came here. 10 years is a long time to be alone. Not so long." He stood, collected their bowls. "The dead make good company. They don't change, don't disappoint. Just stay exactly as you remember them." Sarah watched him wash the bowls with practiced efficiency, every movement speaking of routine honed over years of solitude. The cabin was Spartan but clean, everything in its place. Tools hung on the walls, traps, knives, a bow and quiver, books. Surprisingly, filled a rough shelf near the bed. A Bible, some Shakespeare, what looked like agricultural guides. "You read?" she asked. Surprised. "Missionaries taught me when I was young, before I learned they wanted to steal our souls along with our land." He dried his hands on a cloth. But the books weren't to blame for that. Words are just words. He moved to tend her ankle then, kneeling beside the bed with a bowl of hot water and clean cloths. His touch was gentle but impersonal, the careful ministrations of someone who'd tended plenty of injuries. "It's not as bad as I feared," he said, wrapping it firmly but not too tight. "Few days rest. You'll be walking, week or two, good as new. I can't stay that long. They'll do nothing." His voice carried quiet certainty. "Storms covered your tracks, and they think you're dead at the bottom of some ravine. Even if they come looking, they won't find this place. White men don't see what they don't expect to see." Sarah wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. The warmth, the food, the safety. It was all too much after the terror of the morning. Her eyelids grew heavy. "Rest," Chayton said, rising. "I'll keep watch." "Why are you helping me?" she asked drowsily. "You don't even know my name." "Don't need to. Saw enough when those men were hunting you like an animal." He moved toward the door, checking his rifle. "Besides, been a long time since these walls heard a woman's voice. House remembers, even if I try to forget." Sarah drifted off to the sound of him humming something low and mournful, a Lakota death song, though she didn't know it. When she woke again, it was full dark, and Chayton was sitting by the fire, working on what looked like a snare. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He glanced up. "Don't need much. You?" "My ankle's throbbing." It wasn't entirely a lie, though the pain wasn't what kept her awake. It was the strangeness of it all. This place, this man, this unexpected sanctuary. Chayton rose and rummaged in a wooden box, returning with a small leather pouch. Willow bark tea helps with pain. He set about making it with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. You haven't asked. Sarah said suddenly. Asked what? Why I was running. Why I was in a wedding dress. He handed her the tea, its bitter scent filling her nostrils. Figure you'll tell me if you want. Not my business otherwise. But Sarah found she did want to tell someone. Needed to, maybe. So as she sipped the tea, she told him everything. Her father's gambling debts, Marcus Thornton's cruel proposition, the wedding she'd been forced into that very morning, standing at the altar in a dress her mother had worn 20 years before, while Thornton's cold eyes devoured her like she was already his property. I waited until the preacher asked if anyone objected, she said, staring into her mug. Then I said I do and ran, grabbed the nearest horse and rode hard as I could. Brave, Chayton said simply. Desperate, Sarah corrected. You don't know Marcus Thornton. He owns judges, sheriffs, half the territorial government. He's probably got 100 men looking for me by now. Let them look. Chayton's voice carried an edge now, steel beneath the calm. A man like that depends on fear. Take away the fear. He's just another bully with a gun. Easy for you to say. You're not... Sarah stopped, suddenly aware of how that sounded. Not a woman? Chayton finished. No, but I've seen what men like that do to women, to children, to anyone weaker than them. His gray eyes went distant. Army came through our winter camp once, soldiers looking for hostiles, found only women and children and old men. Didn't matter. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken horrors. Sarah pulled the buffalo hide higher, though she wasn't cold. I'm sorry, she said again, feeling how inadequate the words were. Not your doing. He stood, moving to bank the fire for the night. Worlds full of Marcus Thorntons. Different names, same sickness, thinking they can own what was never meant to be owned. He settled back on his stool, apparently his bed for the night. Sarah realized with a pang of guilt. Take the bed, she protested. I've already imposed enough. You're injured. Discussion's over. His tone brooked no argument, but there was kindness in it too. Sarah lay back, watching shadows dance on the cabin walls. Strange how safe she felt here. With this man she'd known less than a day. Safer than she'd felt in her father's house. Certainly safer than she'd have been in Thornton's mansion. Chayton, she said softly. Thank you for everything. He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, been a long time since anyone said my name. Almost forgot how it sounded. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the willow bark tea do its work. Tomorrow would bring new problems. Thornton wouldn't give up easily, and she couldn't hide here forever. But tonight, in this cabin frozen in time, with this gentle warrior keeping watch, she was safe. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Chayton's voice, singing soft and low in Lakota, not a death song this time, but something that sounded like a prayer, or maybe a promise. 3 days passed in the mountain cabin, each one softening the sharp edges of fear that had driven Sarah there. Her ankle improved daily under Chayton's careful ministrations, and she found herself settling into the quiet rhythm of his isolated life. Morning coffee by the fire, simple meals of venison and wild roots, evenings spent in companionable silence while he worked on repairs and she mended her torn wedding dress, not to wear again, but because idle hands made her nervous. It was the 4th evening when everything changed. Sarah sat by the fire, reading from Chayton's worn copy of Shakespeare, the pages soft as cloth from years of handling. He was cleaning his rifle, movements automatic from long practice, when she noticed him watching her. What? She asked, self-conscious. My wife used to read aloud sometimes, he said quietly. Haven't heard those words spoken in 10 years. Sarah's heart clenched at the raw loneliness in his voice. Would you like me to? He nodded, just once, and Sarah began reading from The Tempest, her voice filling the cabin that had known only silence for so long. When she reached Prospero's speech about the revels ending, She saw Chaitin's hands still on the rifle, his eyes distant. "We are such stuff as dreams are made on," she finished softly. She loved that one. His voice was rough. Said it reminded her that nothing lasts forever, good or bad. She sounds wise. She was. Chaitin set the rifle aside, staring into the fire. Gentle Dove. Her name was. 18 when I married her. 25 when the fever took her. Sarah closed the book carefully. "Tell me about her?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, like a dam breaking, the words came. He told her about a young woman who laughed like water over stones, who could track a deer better than any warrior but wouldn't eat meat during the moon of growing things. He spoke of their daughter, little Fox, who had her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin, who was just learning to bead when the sickness came. 3 days, he said, voice barely above a whisper. That's all it took. 3 days and everything I loved was ash. Sarah moved without thinking, crossing the small space to kneel beside his stool. She didn't touch him, sensing that would be too much, but her presence was enough. Tears tracked down his weathered face, the first he'd shed in years. "I haven't spoken their names since I buried them," he said. "Haven't seen a woman's face, heard a woman's laugh, built my world small enough that nothing could hurt like that again. But that's not living," Sarah said gently. "That's just waiting to die." His storm-gray eyes met hers, and something electric passed between them. "Maybe I was, until I saw you in that snow, fighting for your life. Made me remember there are still things worth fighting for." The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind howled around the cabin walls, but inside, the air had gone still as held breath. "Sarah," Chaitin said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "I need to tell you something. These days, they've been like spring after the longest winter, but you can't stay here." "I know," she whispered, though the thought of leaving made her chest tight. "Thornton won't stop looking." "No, that's not—" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "It's me, being near you. I'd forgotten what it feels like to want something." "Someone, and that's not fair to you." Sarah rose too, her ankle barely twinging now. "What if I want to stay?" He turned, and the look on his face was equal parts hope and terror. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm nearly twice your age. I've got nothing to offer but this cabin and the ghosts that haunt it. Stop." Sarah stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. "You think I care about any of that? You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you see me, not as property to be traded or a prize to be won, just me." "Sarah," her name came out broken. "I was supposed to marry Marcus Thornton yesterday," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "Standing in that church, I thought my life was over, but maybe it was just beginning. Maybe I had to lose everything to find—" She never finished. Chaitin crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with impossible gentleness. "I haven't kissed a woman in 10 years, he said hoarsely. "Haven't wanted to, until now." "Then kiss me," Sarah breathed. He did, and it was nothing like the crude pawing she'd expected from Thornton. This was reverent, desperate, a drowning man finding air. His lips were soft despite the hard life etched into his face, and when Sarah wound her arms around his neck, she felt him shudder. They broke apart, both breathing hard. Chaitin rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "This is madness," he murmured. Maybe it's the sanest thing either of us has ever done." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "Chaitin, I can't go back. Not to my father, not to that life. And you can't keep living with ghosts." He was quiet for so long she feared she'd pushed too far. Then he spoke. Words careful and deliberate. "In my mother's people, marriage isn't about papers and preachers. It's about 2 people choosing each other, making promises under the sky. The earth witnesses, the wind carries the words, and that's enough." Sarah's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he took her hands, calloused thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "I'm saying that if you're willing, I would speak those words with you, here, tonight, make you my wife in the old way, the true way, and then we face whatever comes together. But we barely know each other. I know you're brave enough to run when staying would kill your spirit. I know you're kind enough to read to a lonely fool. I know when I thought those men might hurt you, something woke in me that I thought was dead forever." His gray eyes bore into hers. "What else matters?" Sarah thought of her parents' marriage, 20 years of quiet resentment and duty, of Thornton's cold possession. Then she looked at this man who'd shown her more genuine care in 4 days than she'd known in a lifetime. "Yes," she said simply. Chayton's face transformed, years falling away as wonder replaced sorrow. "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." He kissed her again, deeper this time, 10 years of loneliness pouring out. When they parted, he was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes. "There are words to be said," he told her, "promises to make. Will you trust me?" Sarah nodded, and Chayton led her to the door. He wrapped her in his heavy buffalo coat before stepping out into the night. The storm had passed, leaving crystal-clear skies ablaze with stars. Their breath clouded in the frigid air as he guided her to a flat stone near the cabin. "This is where I buried them," he said softly. "Seems right they witnessed this." He faced her, taking both her hands, and began to speak in Lakota. The words flowed like water, ancient and powerful. Then he translated, his voice strong and sure. "Before the earth and sky, I take you as my wife. I promise to provide for you, protect you, honor you as the morning honors the sun. I promise to be truthful, to share my fire, my food, my life. I promise that your sorrows will be my sorrows, your joys my joys, from this breath until my last." Tears stung Sarah's eyes as she understood the weight of what he offered. Not ownership, but partnership. Not possession, but protection. "I don't know the words in your language," she said. "Then speak from your heart. The wind understands all languages." Sarah squeezed his hands, gathering courage. "Before the earth and sky, I take you as my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to help chase away the ghosts, to fill your silence with laughter again. I promise to choose you, every day, no matter what storms may come, from this breath until my last." Chayton pulled her close, and under the vast Wyoming sky, they sealed their vows with a kiss that tasted of new beginnings and old pain finally starting to heal. "My wife," he murmured against her lips, wonder in his voice. "My husband?" she replied, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. They stayed there a moment longer, holding each other under the stars, while the wind carried their promises across the mountains. Sarah thought she felt other presences, gentle approval from those who'd gone before. Or maybe it was just hope, fragile and new, taking root in frozen ground. When they finally went inside, the cabin felt different. Warmer, somehow, fuller, as if the walls themselves recognized the change. "What now?" Sarah asked, suddenly shy. Chayton touched her face with infinite tenderness. "Now we learn how to live again, together." Outside, snow began to fall once more, but inside the cabin, spring had finally come. The morning after their mountain wedding dawned clear and cold, ice crystals glittering on every surface like nature's celebration. Sarah woke to find Chayton already up, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast with the same quiet efficiency she'd come to expect. But something had changed. The rigid distance he'd maintained was gone, replaced by a warmth that made her heart skip. "Morning," she said softly. He turned, and the smile that lit his face was answer enough. "Morning, wife." The simple word sent a thrill through her. Wife, not property, not chattel, but partner. She rose, wrapping a blanket around herself, and joined him by the fire. "We need to talk about what comes next," Chayton said, handing her a mug of coffee. "Thornton won't give up easy. Men like him never do." "I know." Sarah had been trying not to think about it. to just exist in this bubble of unexpected happiness. But reality always intrudes. He'll send more men, maybe come himself. That's why we need to go to town. Face this head on. Sarah's mug stilled halfway to her lips. Town? Chayton, that's suicide. He owns the sheriff, the judge. He owns them because people are scared. But fear's like ice, looks solid until you put weight on it. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. I spent 10 years hiding from the world. Won't hide anymore, and won't let you hide either. What are you proposing? We go to Granger's Crossing. It's the closest town, 2 days' ride. We find the preacher, make our marriage legal in the white man's way too. Then we face down Thornton together. Sarah set down her mug, hands trembling slightly. You do that, walk into his territory, risk. I'd walk through hell itself, Chayton said simply. That's what the vows meant. They spent the morning preparing for the journey. Chayton packed provisions with practiced efficiency, while Sarah donned the sturdy clothes that had belonged to his sister, leather leggings, warm tunic, fur-lined coat. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the pale, frightened girl who'd fled in a wedding dress. This woman looked capable, strong. Tell me about Gentle Dove, Sarah said as they worked. Not the sad parts? Tell me what made you fall in love with her? Chayton paused in his packing, a soft smile playing at his lips. First time I saw her, she was trying to break a wild Mustang. Stubborn creature kept throwing her, and she kept getting back on. Must have hit the dirt a dozen times. When I offered to help, she told me, very politely, to go find something useful to do. Sarah laughed, the sound filling the cabin like music. And did you? I sat on that fence for 3 hours watching her. By sunset, she was riding that horse like she'd raised it from a foal. He shook his head at the memory. That's when I knew. She sounds wonderful. She was, and she'd approve of you. He met her eyes. She'd say I was a fool to wait so long to start living again. They set out at midday. Sarah riding behind Chayton on his paint horse, the wedding dress, mended but unworn, stayed behind in the cabin, a ghost of the life she'd escaped. As they descended from the mountains, the landscape opened up, white plains stretching endlessly under a pale blue sky. That first night, they camped in a grove of cottonwoods near a frozen creek. Chayton built a small fire, careful to keep it smokeless, and they ate dried venison and flatbread in companionable silence. When darkness fell, he spread their bedrolls close but not touching, maintaining a careful propriety that both touched and frustrated Sarah. Chayton, she said softly, we're married. We are. He stared into the fire. But you've been through enough without. I want you to be sure, really sure. Not just grateful or scared or... Sarah moved to his bedroll, silencing him with a kiss. I'm sure, she whispered against his lips. I chose you under the stars. I choose you now. What followed was gentle and patient, 2 wounded souls finding healing in each other's arms. Afterward, they lay entwined under the buffalo robes, Sarah's head on Chayton's chest, listening to his heartbeat. No regrets? He asked. Only that it took us so long to find each other. The second day's travel was harder. As they neared civilization, Chayton grew increasingly tense, scanning the horizon constantly. His caution proved justified when they spotted riders in the distance, 3 men moving purposefully along the valley floor. Down! Chayton hissed, guiding the horse into a wash. They dismounted, keeping low. Is it them? Sarah whispered. Chayton studied the riders through the afternoon glare. Can't tell, but we assume yes. He was silent a moment, thinking. There's another way to town. Longer, but safer. Through Massacre Creek. Sarah didn't ask how the creek got its name. In this country, such stories were common as dirt. They traveled through the night, following paths invisible to Sarah but clear as roads to Chayton. By dawn, Granger's Crossing appeared, a collection of rough buildings huddled against the prairie wind. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Sarah could hear the distant sound of hammering. "Remember," Chayton said as they approached, "we face this together. No running, no hiding." "No hiding," Sarah agreed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. They entered town as the sun climbed higher, drawing stares from the early risers. A white woman in native dress riding with a Lakota warrior. It wasn't a sight Granger's Crossing saw every day. Sarah kept her head high, meeting the curious gazes steadily. The church sat at the far end of the main street, its whitewashed walls stark against the muddy thoroughfare. Reverend Michael Stewart answered their knock, a thin man with kind eyes that widened at the sight of them. "We need to be married," Chayton said without preamble. "Legal and binding. That is—" The Reverend glanced between them, clearly flustered. "Do you have witnesses? Documentation?" "We have the truth," Sarah said firmly. "Is that not enough for God's house?" Something in her voice must have reached him. Stewart stepped aside. "Come in. Tell me your story." Inside the simple church, Sarah told him everything. Her forced engagement to Thornton, her escape, Chayton's rescue, their marriage under the stars. The Reverend listened without interruption, his expression grave. "Marcus Thornton is a powerful man," he said when she finished. "What you're asking, it could bring his wrath on this whole town, or it could show people they don't have to live in fear." Chayton said quietly, "That's what men like Thornton count on. Good people doing nothing." Stewart was quiet for a long moment, fingers steepled in prayer. Then he nodded. "You're right, of course. I've held my tongue too long, watched him destroy too many lives." He stood. "I'll marry you proper, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no music, just sacred words in a dusty church. But when Stewart pronounced them man and wife before God and the law, Sarah felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. This was home. They were signing the marriage certificate when the church door banged open. Jake Morrison stood silhouetted against the morning light, hand on his pistol. Well, he drawled. "Thornton's gonna be right pleased. His runaway bride and the savage who stole her, all wrapped up neat." Chayton moved smoothly, putting himself between Morrison and Sarah. "She's my wife, legal and proper. You've got no claim here." "That's so." Morrison's smile was ugly. "Funny thing about legal. It's whatever, mister. Thornton says it is. Not in God's house," Reverend Stewart said, stepping forward with surprising courage. "This marriage is valid and will be recorded as such. Any action against them is a crime before heaven and earth." Morrison's hand tightened on his gun. For a moment, Sarah thought he might draw. Then voices rose outside, townspeople gathering, drawn by the commotion. "This isn't over," Morrison snarled. "Mr. Thornton will be coming, and when he does, this whole town will learn what happens to those who cross him." He backed out, leaving the door swinging. Through the windows, Sarah could see people flooding into the street, word spreading like wildfire. The bride who'd run from Marcus Thornton, the warrior who'd claimed her, the preacher who'd blessed their union. "The die is cast," Stewart murmured. "May God help us all." Chayton took Sarah's hand, his grip steady and sure. "Let him come," he said quietly. "We'll be ready." As they left the church, Sarah saw something she hadn't expected in the faces of the townspeople. Not just curiosity or fear, but a flicker of something else. Hope. Maybe Chayton was right. Maybe fear was like ice, solid until you put weight on it. Time would tell if they were strong enough to break through. Word of Marcus Thornton's approach reached Granger's Crossing like a storm front moving in from the mountains. He was coming with a dozen men. They said he was coming with the territorial marshal. He was coming with papers that would nullify any marriage, legal or otherwise. Fear rippled through the town like wind through wheat. Sarah stood at the window of the boarding house where she and Chayton had taken a room, watching the street below. People hurried past with their heads down. Businesses closed early, and mothers pulled their children inside. The town was battening down for a storm. "They're scared," she said softly. Chayton joined her at the window, his presence solid and reassuring. "They've got cause, but fear can turn to courage quick enough, given the right spark. And if it doesn't, then we face him alone." He turned her to face him. "I meant what I said. We don't run." A knock at the door interrupted them. Chayton's hand went to his knife, but Sarah recognized the voice calling softly through the wood. "It's Reverend Stewart. Please, I must speak with you." They let him in, and the preacher's usually calm face was creased with worry. "Thornton's camped 5 miles outside town. He sent Morrison ahead with a message." "What message?" Chayton asked, though they both could guess. "He wants Sarah returned to him by dawn, or he'll burn the town. Says the marriage is invalid, that she was already pledged to him, that no savage has the right to take what's his." Stewart's voice shook with indignation, as if she were cattle to be branded. "So, the town elders." Chayton's voice was carefully neutral. "Divided. Some say we should stand firm. That right is right. Others—" Stewart sighed. "Others say one woman isn't worth the town. I'm ashamed to say that view is gaining ground." Sarah felt ice in her veins, but before she could speak, Chayton stepped forward. "Tell them this," he said quietly. "If they give her up to save themselves, they'll never be free. Today it's my wife. Tomorrow it's someone's daughter, someone's land, someone's life. Men like Thornton are never satisfied. They take and take until there's nothing left but shadows of people too broken to resist." Stewart nodded slowly. "You speak truth, but truth doesn't stop bullets." "No," Chayton agreed. "But sometimes it makes people willing to face them." After the Reverend left, they sat in the gathering darkness, holding each other close. Sarah could feel the tension in Chayton's body, the warrior preparing for battle. "Tell me about Massacre Creek," she said suddenly. "Where we passed through." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't want to hear that story. I think I need to understand what we're facing." Chayton sighed. 20 years back, a wagon train came through, settlers heading west, full of dreams. They camped by the creek, thinking it was safe, but they'd been cutting through sacred burial grounds, shooting buffalo for sport, leaving the meat to rot. His voice grew distant. A band of young warriors decided to teach them a lesson. It went bad. Women, children. By dawn, the creek ran red. "Your people?" "Some." And the cavalry's response was worse. They hunted down every native camp for 50 miles. Didn't matter if they'd been involved or not. He looked at her, eyes haunted. "That's how it works out here. Violence calls to violence, until everyone's hands are bloody and no one remembers who struck first." "But we're not striking first," Sarah said firmly. "We're just refusing to be victims." "Same thing to men like Thornton." They made love that night with desperate tenderness, aware it might be their last time. Sarah memorized the feel of him, the scent of leather and sage that clung to his skin, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Dawn came too soon, painting the sky the color of blood. They dressed in silence, Chayton in his buckskins, rifle across his back, Sarah in the practical clothes of a frontier woman, her hair braided tight. Together they walked down the empty street toward the church, where they could already see riders gathering. Thornton sat his horse like a king surveying his domain. He was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 35, with a kind of harsh handsomeness that spoke of cruelty. His pale eyes found her immediately, and his smile made her skin crawl. "Sarah," he called out, voice carrying clearly. "You've led me quite a chase. Time to end this foolishness." "The only foolishness," Chayton said, stepping forward, "is you thinking you have any claim here." Thornton's eyes flicked to him dismissively. "The savage speaks. Tell me, boy, do you know what happened the last time your kind challenged white law in these parts? I know what happens when people stand together instead of alone." Chayton replied calmly. Sarah became aware of movement around them, townspeople emerging from buildings, gathering in doorways and windows. Not many, but more than she'd expected. She saw the blacksmith, hammer in hand, the schoolmarm, chin raised defiantly. Even old Walter from the general store, ancient rifle across his knees. Thornton noticed too, and his smile faltered. You people want to die for a runaway woman and her Indian? We want to live free. Someone called out. Sarah couldn't see who. Without fearing you'll take our daughters next. Or our lands, another voice added. Or our lives, said a third. Reverend Stewart stepped out of the church, Bible in hand. Marcus Thornton, this woman is legally married in the eyes of God and man. You have no authority here. Authority? Thornton's voice rose. I own the mortgage on half this town. I own the judges, the marshals, You own nothing, Chayton interrupted. Just paper and fear. And fear's a currency that's losing value fast. Thornton's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped as a dozen weapons cocked around the square. Not many, but enough. The message was clear. You'd all hang for this. He snarled. Maybe, the blacksmith said, but you'd be too dead to watch. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could hear her heart thundering, could feel Chayton coiled beside her, ready to move. One wrong twitch and the street would run red like Massacre Creek. Then, unexpectedly, one of Thornton's own men spoke. Boss, Jake Morrison said quietly, maybe we should go. Thornton whirled on him. What? Look around. This ain't gonna end clean. And for what? One woman who don't want you? Morrison shrugged. Plenty of willing women in the world. It's about principle. It's about pride. Morrison cut him off. And pride ain't worth dying for. Not today. Sarah saw the moment Thornton realized he'd lost. His men were nervous. The town was standing firm. And the story would spread. How Marcus Thornton had been faced down by a ragtag group of townspeople and one Lakota warrior. This isn't over, he said finally, voice low and venomous. You've made an enemy today. All of you. We already were your enemies. The schoolmarm said clearly. We're just not afraid anymore. Thornton's face went dark with rage, but he wheeled his horse around. Mount up, he barked at his men. They rode out slowly, and Sarah didn't breathe properly until they were dust on the horizon. Then her knees buckled, and Chayton caught her, holding her tight as the crowd erupted in nervous laughter and tears. It's done, someone said. We actually did it. It's not done, Chayton said quietly, though only Sarah could hear. Men like him don't forget, but for today. He looked down at her and smiled. For today, we won. The celebration that followed was subdued but heartfelt. People shook their hands, clapped Chayton's shoulder, told Sarah she was welcome in Granger's Crossing. The change was subtle but real. They'd found their courage. And it had held. As the sun climbed higher, Reverend Stewart approached them. What will you do now? Sarah looked at Chayton, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. We'll go home, she said. To the mountain. But not to hide. We'll build something there. A real home. And if Thornton comes? Chayton's smile was sharp as winter wind. Then he'll learn what it means to threaten a Lakota warrior's family. The old way. They left that afternoon, riding together toward the mountains. Behind them, Granger's Crossing went about its business. Forever changed. Ahead, the peaks rose white and clean against the sky, promising shelter and new beginnings. No regrets? Chayton asked as the town disappeared behind them. Sarah leaned back against him, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. Only one. What's that? That I can't see Thornton's face when he realizes his power is broken. Chayton's laugh rumbled through his chest. That's my warrior wife talking. Warrior wife. Sarah liked the sound of that. She'd started this journey as a runaway bride, property fleeing its owner. She'd found something she never expected. Not just love, but strength. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just escape, but home. The mountains welcomed them back. And if shadows still lingered on the horizon, well, they'd face those together too. After all, they'd made promises under the stars. And unlike the papers and threats of men like Marcus Thornton, those promises were unbreakable. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, on a day when spring fought to break winter's grip on the mountains. Sarah was tending the small garden they'd started, vegetables and herbs coaxed from the reluctant soil, when Chayton appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Riders coming up the valley," he said quietly. 8 of them. Sarah's hand stilled on the hoe. They'd known this day would come. Marcus Thornton wasn't the type to let humiliation stand. She followed Chayton inside, where he was already checking his weapons. Rifle, pistol, the knife that never left his side. "How long?" she asked. "Hour, maybe less." He looked at her, gray eyes steady. "You could still run. Take the back trail. Head for—" "We've had this discussion." Sarah moved to the trunk where they kept ammunition, began loading spare magazines with practiced efficiency. 3 weeks of mountain living had hardened her, taught her skills she'd never imagined needing. "I'm not leaving." Chayton nodded, having expected no less. "Then we make our stand." They prepared in silence, each knowing their role. Chayton positioned himself at the front window with his rifle, while Sarah took the side window. The pistol he'd taught her to shoot steady in her hands. The cabin, built for defense as much as shelter, gave them good coverage. The riders appeared as shadows against the snow, spreading out as they approached. Sarah recognized Morrison immediately, and beside him, Thornton himself. The others were hired guns. She could tell by the way they sat their horses, alert and predatory. "Iron Hand," Thornton's voice carried clearly across the clearing. "Send out my property, and we'll leave peaceful-like. The only property here is mine." Chayton called back, "And you're trespassing on it. Big talk for a man outnumbered 8-1. 8-2, Sarah called out, letting them see her at the window. "And this high ground's worth another 4. She heard one of the men curse, saw them reassessing. Taking a fortified position uphill was no easy task, even with numbers. "Sarah," Thornton's voice turned coaxing. "You've had your adventure. Time to come home. Your father misses you." "My father sold me to pay his debts." Sarah replied coldly. "I have no father? Then you're truly alone. What happens when your savage gets himself killed protecting you? Where will you go then?" "Forward," she said simply. "Always forward. Never back to you." Thornton's face darkened. "Every man down there is worth $20 dead or alive in 3 territories, he said. "You sure you want their blood on your conscience?" "Only blood spilled here will be by your choosing." Chayton said, "Leave now, and everyone rides away. Or," Chayton's voice was winter cold, "or I introduce you to what my people call the death of 1,000 cuts. Your men will die clean. You won't." Something in his tone must have reached the hired guns. Sarah saw them exchanging glances, calculating odds. $20 wasn't worth dying for, not against a fortified position held by a Lakota warrior with nothing to lose. "Boss," one of them started. "Shut up," Thornton snarled. "First man who turns tail gets a bullet in the back." That was his mistake. Sarah saw it immediately, threatening his own men when they were already nervous. The dynamic shifted, subtle but real. "Tell you what," Morrison said suddenly, loud enough for all to hear. "How about we settle this proper-like? You and Iron Hand, single combat, winner takes all." Thornton whirled on him. "What?" "Makes sense," Morrison continued, ignoring his boss's fury. "Man to man, that's how they do it in his world. Ain't it?" He looked up at the cabin. "What say you? Iron Hand, you and Mr. Thornton, no guns. Just knives. Winner gets the woman." "I'm not a prize to be won," Sarah said sharply. "No," Chayton agreed. "But if Thornton wants to die by blade instead of bullet, I'll oblige him." The clearing went quiet. Sarah could see Thornton trapped by his own pride. Refuse, and he looked like a coward. Accept, and he faced a warrior who'd been handling knives since childhood. "Fine," Thornton spat finally. He dismounted, pulling a Bowie knife from his belt. "Let's finish this." Chayton looked at Sarah. She wanted to protest, to say this wasn't necessary, but she saw the determination in his eyes. This was about more than just them now. This was about breaking Thornton's power once and for all. He descended from the cabin slowly, deliberately, his own blade catching the weak spring sunlight. The two men faced each other in the clearing while the others formed a rough circle. "When you're dead," Thornton said, "I'm going to make her watch while I—" He never finished. Chayton moved like water, the insult spurring him to action. Their blades met with a ring of steel, and then they were circling, testing each other. Thornton was good. Sarah had to give him that. He fought with the brutal efficiency of a man who'd killed before, but Chayton was something else entirely. He flowed around Thornton's attacks, each movement economical, purposeful. Where Thornton hacked and slashed, Chayton danced. First blood went to Chayton, a shallow cut across Thornton's sword arm, then another, along the ribs, and another. Sarah realized with cold clarity what was happening. The death of 1,000 cuts. Chayton was taking him apart piece by piece. "Stand still and fight," Thornton roared. Lunging wildly, Chayton sidestepped, his blade painting another red line across Thornton's back. "I am fighting. You're just dying." The truth of it was obvious to everyone watching. Thornton was slowing, blood loss and exhaustion taking their toll. His attacks became desperate, clumsy. When Chayton's blade found the tendons behind his knee, he went down hard. Chayton stood over him, knife at his throat. "Yield. Go to hell, savage. After you." But Chayton didn't strike the killing blow. Instead, he looked up at the watching men. "You've all seen. He's beaten. Take him and go. Tell everyone what happened here. Tell them Marcus Thornton is finished." "You can't let him live," Morrison said quietly. "You know that. I know dead martyrs are more dangerous than living cowards." Chayton replied, "He'll spend the rest of his life knowing he was beaten by the man whose wife he tried to steal. That's worse than death for someone like him." He stepped back, keeping his knife ready. Thornton tried to rise, fell, tried again. Finally, two of his men had to help him to his horse. His face was twisted with rage and humiliation, but also something else. Fear. He'd looked into the eyes of death and blinked first. "This isn't over," he managed to snarl. "Yes," Chayton said simply. "It is. Come near my wife again, and I won't be merciful. That's not a threat. It's a promise." They watched the riders disappear down the valley. Thornton slumped in his saddle. Only when they were gone did Chayton's strength seem to leave him. He sank to one knee in the bloodied snow. Sarah ran to him, checking frantically for wounds. "You're hurt?" "Just tired." He managed to smile. "Been a while since I fought like that." She helped him back to the cabin, where she cleaned and bandaged the few cuts Thornton had managed to land. As she worked, tears she'd been holding back finally came. "Hey," Chayton said softly, catching her hands. "We won. It's over." "I know. It's just—" She took a shuddering breath. "I was so scared I'd lose you. Right after finding you." He pulled her close, and she breathed in his familiar scent. Leather and sage and home. "Takes more than Marcus Thornton to separate us," he murmured into her hair. "We're bound by stronger things than fear." That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Sarah asked, "Do you really think he'll stay away?" His men saw him beaten, bloodied, begging. That story will spread faster than wildfire. By month's end, he'll have lost everything: respect, fear, power. Men like him don't survive that. He was right. Word came weeks later through a traveling trader. Marcus Thornton had fled the territory entirely. His holdings seized by creditors once people stopped fearing him. Some said he'd headed California way. Others claimed Mexico. Sarah didn't care. As long as he was gone, you gave him mercy, she said to Chayton when they heard the news. "No," he corrected gently. "I gave him justice. Death would have been mercy. Living with failure, that's his punishment." Sarah thought about that as she looked out at their valley. Green now, with spring's arrival. The garden was thriving. They'd started building an addition to the cabin, and just yesterday she'd felt the first flutter of new life within her belly. A secret she'd share with Chayton tonight. They'd faced down the past and won. Now it was time to build the future. The evening sun painted the mountains gold as Chayton joined her outside, his arms coming around her from behind. Together they stood watching the light fade, two souls who'd found each other across loss and loneliness. "Any regrets?" he asked, as he often did. Sarah turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "Only that we can't have more time. A lifetime doesn't seem like enough." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, full of promise. "Then we'd better make every moment count." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their vows, Sarah knew they would. They'd fought for this life, this love, this freedom, and they'd cherish every second of it. The warrior and his bride. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A beginning built on courage, trust, and the kind of love that comes from choosing each other not just once, but every single day. The gunfight that would echo through Wyoming territory for years to come began with a dust cloud on the horizon. Sarah spotted it first from where she stood hanging wash, the life within her now showing despite the loose dress. 5 months had passed since Thornton's humiliation. 5 months of peace that had lulled them into something dangerously close to complacency. "Chayton," she called, keeping her voice level despite the ice forming in her chest. He emerged from the barn where he'd been working leather, took one look at the approaching riders, and his face went stone still. "Inside, now!" But Sarah was already moving, her mother's instincts fierce though the babe wasn't yet born. She grabbed the rifle from its place by the door, while Chayton checked his ammunition. This time felt different. These weren't hired thugs or strutting bullies. The way they rode, spread out, cautious, professional, spoke of deadlier intent. "Morrison," Chayton said quietly, studying them through the window. "And Tom Briggs. +3, I don't know. I thought Morrison turned against Thornton. Money talks louder than conscience for some." He checked his pistol. Movements economical. Thornton must have scraped together enough for one last try. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. Morrison rode forward alone, hands visible but ready. "Iron Hand, Mrs. Iron Hand," his voice carried clearly. "We come with an offer." "State it from there," Chayton called back. "Thornton's dead. Killed himself 2 weeks back in California, but before he died, he put a bounty on your heads. $5,000 each." Sarah's breath caught. That was more money than most men saw in a lifetime. "That's not an offer," Chayton said. "That's a death sentence." "Here's the offer," Morrison continued. "You come peaceful-like. We take you to the territorial judge, explain the whole story. Maybe they're lenient, seeing as how Thornton pushed you to it. Maybe you serve a few years instead of hanging. Better than dying here, leaving your woman alone. Or maybe," Sarah called out, "you ride away now while you still can." Morrison's laugh was humorless. "Ma'am, with respect, there's 5 of us and 2 of you, and word is you're carrying. Your man won't risk you and the babe in a gunfight." That was their mistake, thinking Chayton's love made him weak instead of dangerous. Sarah saw it in the way his gray eyes went cold as winter storms. "You're right," Chayton said calmly. "I won't risk them, which is why you're already dead. You just don't know it yet." The first shot came from behind the riders, a rifle crack that took one of the strangers out of his saddle. The riders wheeled, confused, as another shot dropped a second man. From the tree line, Lakota warriors emerged like ghosts, 5 of them, war-painted and armed. "My brothers from the reservation," Chayton explained to the stunned Morrison. "Did you think I'd forgotten my people? Did you think they'd forgotten me?" The odds had shifted dramatically. Morrison, Briggs, and the last hired gun found themselves caught between the cabin and the warriors, outmaneuvered and outgunned. "This doesn't have to end in blood," Chayton called. "Drop your weapons, right away. Live!" For a moment, Sarah thought they might comply. Then Briggs, always more vicious than smart, went for his gun. The clearing erupted in gunfire. Sarah dropped to one knee at the window, sighting carefully, her rifle steady despite her pounding heart. She saw Briggs twist in his saddle, clutching his shoulder where her bullet found him. Chayton's rifle boomed beside her. and the last hired gun toppled from his horse. Morrison, caught in the crossfire, made a desperate charge for the cabin. His horse screamed and fell, multiple bullets finding their marks. He rolled clear, came up running, pistol in hand. Chayton stepped out to meet him. They faced each other in the yard, 20 feet apart. Morrison was bleeding from a graze across his temple, his gun hand shaking slightly. Should have stayed bought, Chayton said quietly. Man's got to make a living, Morrison replied. Not off my family's blood. They drew simultaneously. The two shots sounded as one, echoing off the mountain walls. For a heartbeat, both men stood frozen. Then Morrison's gun fell from nerveless fingers, and he crumpled to the earth, a spreading red stain on his chest. Chayton turned, and Sarah saw blood on his sleeve. Before she could cry out, he raised his hand. Just a graze, nothing serious. The Lakota warriors were moving among the fallen, checking for life. Briggs groaned. Still alive, but badly wounded. The eldest warrior, a man with iron-gray braids whom Chayton had introduced as Robert Crow Feather, approached the cabin. It's done, brother. My thanks, Chayton said formally. The debt is heavy. No debt between family. Crow Feather's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Besides, we owed Thornton's men for what they did to young Eagle's sister. This was justice twice served. They tended Briggs' wounds, enough to keep him alive for the ride to town, where he'd faced trial for attempted murder. The bodies of the others were wrapped and loaded on horses. Evidence of self-defense, Crow Feather said practically. White man's law required such things, as the warriors prepared to leave, taking Briggs and the evidence with them. Crow Feather pulled Chayton aside. Sarah couldn't hear their low conversation, but she saw Chayton nod solemnly. What did he say? She asked after they'd gone, leaving them alone with the blood-stained yard and the setting sun. That the reservation isn't far, that family should be close when babies come. Chayton's hand found her swelling belly, gentle and protective. That maybe it's time to stop living with ghosts. Sarah leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the life they'd built and defended. And what do you think? I think... He was quiet for a long moment. I think Gentle Dove would want our child to know both worlds, to have family beyond these walls. Our child, Sarah repeated softly. It still amazed her sometimes, how far they'd come from that terrified flight through a blizzard. They stood together as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow they'd have to deal with the authorities, explain the gunfight, prove their case. But Crow Feather had been confident. 5 known outlaws against a pregnant woman and her husband. With witnesses to testify to the bounty on their heads? Even territorial justice wasn't that blind. Will this ever end? Sarah asked. The violence, the people trying to tear us apart. Thornton's dead. His money died with him. After today, word will spread. Leave the Iron Hands alone, or face the consequences. He turned her to face him. We've earned our peace. Sarah, paid for it in blood and courage. She thought of the women in town, living their safe, predictable lives, never knowing the wild sweetness of being chosen under stars, of building love from loneliness, of standing beside their man with a rifle in hand and fire in their heart. I wouldn't trade it, she said fiercely. Not a moment of it, not even... He gestured at the blood-stained ground. Especially not that. We fought for our life together. That means something. That night, they made love with desperate tenderness, each touch an affirmation of life in the face of death. Later, as Chayton slept beside her, Sarah felt the baby move, strong kicks that spoke of the fighter to come, born of a warrior and a woman who'd refused to be owned. What a child that would be. She thought of Gentle Dove, whose clothes she'd first worn, whose man she now loved. I'll take care of them, she whispered to the darkness. Both of them, I promise. The wind sighed around the cabin walls, and Sarah could have sworn she heard an answer, soft as spring rain, gentle as a dove's wing, blessing, perhaps. or simply the mountain's way of saying some loves transcend even death. Tomorrow would bring questions, challenges, the need to rebuild what violence had torn. But tonight, Sarah Ironhand lay in her husband's arms, their child safe within her. Their enemies scattered to the winds. They'd faced the storm and survived. More than survived. They'd triumphed. And in this hard land where happiness came dear and love came dearer, that was no small thing. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their vows, and Sarah smiled. Let the world come. She and Chayton would meet it together, as they'd met everything else, with courage, with love, and with the unbreakable bond of two hearts that had chosen each other against all odds. The gunfight was over. The building could begin. Spring came to the Wyoming mountains like a promise kept, painting the valleys green and setting wildflowers blooming around the expanded cabin. Sarah stood in the doorway of their new home, no longer just a shelter, but a proper house with rooms for the children that would come, a kitchen where laughter would season the meals, and windows that faced the sunrise. The baby kicked within her, strong and insistent. Only weeks now until their child would enter this world they'd fought so hard to build. Chayton worked nearby, setting posts for a corral. They'd decided to raise horses. His knowledge of the animals combined with her head for business would serve them well. "Riders coming," he called, but there was no alarm in his voice. These days, visitors meant neighbors, not threats. Sarah shaded her eyes, recognizing the lead rider. It's Reverend Stewart, and he's brought others. A small group from Granger's Crossing had made the journey. The Reverend, the schoolmarm Elizabeth Murray, the blacksmith Jonas Harper, and surprisingly, young Deputy William Carson, who'd taken over after the previous sheriff's corruption was exposed. "Mrs. Ironhand," Stewart called warmly as they dismounted. "You're blooming like the spring itself." "Reverend?" She smiled, genuinely pleased. "What brings you all this way?" "Several things." He accepted the cup of water she offered gratefully. "First, to see how you're faring. Second, to bring news. And third," he glanced at the others, "to make a proposal." Chayton joined them, shaking hands all around. The change in the townspeople's attitude toward him still surprised Sarah sometimes, from fear to respect, earned through courage and blood. "What news?" Chayton asked. Deputy Carson spoke up. "Tom Briggs testified to everything before he died. The bounty, Thornton's suicide, the attempt on your lives. Judge cleared you both of any wrongdoing. More than that, there's talk of commendation for breaking Thornton's stranglehold on the territory." "And the proposal?" Sarah prompted. Elizabeth Murray stepped forward, her usual stern expression softened by hope. "The town's growing. Mr. and Mrs. Ironhand, new families arriving every week, drawn by news that Granger's Crossing stands up to bullies. We need a school, a proper one." "I'm no teacher," Sarah began, but Elizabeth raised a hand. "But you could be. You read, write, do figures. More importantly, you understand both worlds, the one we're building and the one that was here first." She glanced meaningfully at Chayton. "The children need to learn from someone who can prepare them for the future while respecting the past. And we need horse stock." Jonas Harper added, "Good mountain horses, trained proper. Word is you're starting a breeding operation. The town council authorized me to negotiate first purchase rights." Sarah looked at Chayton, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. To be part of a community, to build something larger than themselves. Wasn't that what they'd been fighting for all along? "There's more," Stewart said quietly. "Your father, Sarah, he's been asking after you." Sarah stiffened. "He has no claim on me." "No, he doesn't, but he's changed. Lost everything after Thornton's death. The debts came due. And without Thornton's protection, he couldn't dodge them. He's working as a clerk now. Honest labor. Asked me to tell you he's sorry. That's all. Just sorry." Sarah felt Chayton's hand find hers, steady and sure. "Maybe someday," she said finally. "When I'm ready, not before." Stewart nodded. "Forgiveness can't be forced, like spring. It comes in its own time." They talked long into the afternoon. planning and dreaming. A schoolhouse halfway between town and reservation, where all children would be welcome. A horse operation that would strengthen the local economy. A future built on cooperation instead of conquest. As the visitors prepared to leave, Elizabeth pressed a package into Sarah's hands. For the baby, from the women in town. Inside was a beautiful quilt, each square sewn by different hands, a community's welcome for a child not yet born. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "For everything?" After they left, Sarah and Chayton sat on their new porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The baby shifted and kicked, making her gasp. "Soon," Chayton murmured, his hand gentle on her belly. "Are you ready? For the baby? The school? The future?" Sarah laughed softly. "I don't know, but we'll face it like we've faced everything else. Together. Always together." 3 weeks later, as spring storms rolled across the mountains, their daughter entered the world with a cry that could have woken the ancestors. They named her Hope. Hope, gentle dove Ironhand, bridging all worlds with her very name. Crowfeather and his family came from the reservation, bringing traditional gifts and blessings. The townspeople visited too, awkward at first in the mixing of cultures, but genuine in their joy. Watching Elizabeth Murray learn a Lakota lullaby from Crowfeather's wife, seeing Jonas Harper share blacksmithing techniques with young Lakota men, Sarah felt something settling into place. "This is how it should be," she told Chayton one evening as Hope nursed at her breast. "Not perfect, but trying. Not without pain, but healing." He kissed her forehead, then their daughters. "You did this. You and your courage. We did this. From that first moment in the blizzard. We did this together." Summer brought the school's construction, with both communities working side by side. Sarah, Hope tied to her back in traditional fashion, directed the work while Chayton and the men raised walls. By autumn, 20 children sat in the new schoolhouse, learning letters and numbers alongside respect for the land and its first people. The horse operation prospered too. Chayton's reputation for training, combined with Sarah's shrewd bargaining, built something sustainable. They hired help, young men from both town and reservation, learning the trade together. 1 year became 2, became 5. Hope grew strong and wild, equally comfortable in doeskin and gingham, speaking both English and Lakota with childish authority. Brothers followed, Samuel Chayton, who had his father's quiet strength, and Michael Crow, who laughed like spring thunder on a crisp autumn day. As Sarah taught at the school and Chayton worked with a young stallion, a lone rider approached their home. Sarah recognized him despite the years. Her father, grayer now, worn by honest labor and regret. "Sarah," he said simply, "I've no right to ask, but I had to try. To see you, to say, I know what you came to say." Her voice was steady, though her heart raced, and I needed time to decide if I could hear it. They talked for hours as the children played nearby, supervised by their father who watched with protective eyes. Her father held Hope briefly, wonder in his lined face at this granddaughter he'd never thought to meet. When he left, Sarah felt lighter somehow, not reconciled. That would take more time, but open to possibility. Forgiveness, like spring, came slowly but surely. "No regrets?" Chayton asked that night, their ritual question. Sarah looked around their home, children sleeping peacefully, successful business, respected place in the community, love that had weathered every storm. Through the window, she could see the lights of other homes scattered across the valley, the town and reservation growing closer with each passing year. "How could I regret any path that led me here?" she answered. "That led us here?" They made love tenderly, aware of how precious their life together was, how hard-won their happiness. Later, as Chayton slept, Sarah stepped onto the porch. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed a desperate woman fleeing through a blizzard, a lonely warrior making impulsive vows, 2 hearts choosing each other against all odds. "Thank you," she whispered to those stars, to Gentle Dove, to the mountain spirits. to whatever power had guided two broken people together to build something whole. The wind carried her words away, and with them, the last shadows of the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, children to raise, communities to bridge, a life to build day by day. But tonight, Sarah Ironhand stood on her porch, mistress of her own fate, wife to a man who'd given her freedom in offering his protection, mother to children who would know no limits but their own dreams. From runaway bride to warrior's wife to pillar of the community, it had been a journey worth every terrifying, glorious step. And it was far from over. Inside, hope cried out in her sleep, and Sarah went to comfort her daughter. As she sang the child back to dreams, a lullaby that mixed English words with Lakota melody, she smiled. This was what victory looked like. Not the dramatic confrontations, though those had been necessary, but this, a child sleeping safe, a husband's steady breathing, a community growing together instead of apart. The Wild West was changing, slowly but surely. And Sarah Ironhand, who'd once run through a blizzard in a torn wedding dress, was proud to be part of that change. The mountains stood eternal, witnesses to all the small human dramas played out in their shadows. And if they could speak, they would say that of all the love stories they'd sheltered, few burned as bright as the warrior and his runaway bride, who'd chosen each other in defiance of a world that would have kept them apart. Their story, like all the best stories, didn't end with happily ever after. It continued with happily ever onward, building tomorrow one precious day at a time. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Sarah and Chaitin's story of love, courage, and redemption, please let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow lovers of frontier romance. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about what touched your heart in this story. Until next time, keep riding toward your own sunset, partners.